So when we last left Yuka, she had taken her first steps as a legend. And now we see, in the next file, where those steps lead. Yuka looked on, hiding her apprehension as she saw the old woman bring the long, twisted needle to the flame. The young, red-haired girl who had claimed greatness that morning sat face down on a raised cot atop thick white jaca furs, trousers hiked to her waist, and her chin held high. The taste of the god's blood still lingered on her tongue. Earlier, after Yuka had emerged from the ice riding the back of a lurker, she had eaten every bite of the strip of god's meat that had been hacked for her. She washed the bloody meal down with a large cup of starleaf water, brought to her by Aglu from a nearby healer's tent. After that, Yuka remembered little of that day. All she remembered, it had been chaos. Thankfully, her massive aunt had taken up the role of Yuka's protector that afternoon. Everyone, everywhere, wanted to speak to Yuka, to be spoken to by her, and to touch the flesh that had ridden a god. Aglu's bellows and massive arms were all that kept them at bay. "The Dark Mother take them. They can't even wait a damned afternoon to ask for your favor," the warrior woman muttered to herself as she shoved her and Yuka through towards the great tent where Yuka had received the bile and blessing from the Light Rider that morning. Yuka barely took in a word of what was said around her. She had been near delirious from the aching throb coming from her twisted right arm. "It's been twisted out of its socket, girl. Your arm. We'll need to set it fast before the Salt Sisters proceed." Aglu called two of the oarsmen from her crew. They were garbed in black dyed skins and carried satchels over to them as they entered the tent. The two men had held Yuka down as Aglu had twisted and shoved her arm back into her shoulder. The pain had been awful for half a moment, but after a great sickening pop, the pain in her arm had reduced to a dull throb. She had flexed her fingers gratefully. "You'll not be riding any gods out of the water for at least a month, but you should be able to wield an oar or an axe well enough, my little legend," the massive warrior woman had assured her, nudging her arm gently. Once all had been done for proper healing, Aglu banished the two men from the large tent and brought forth a skin of henniper wine. "Drink, child. You've done great things today, but your pain is not yet done." Yuka looked at the woman uncertainly, her eyes adjusting to the dark of the tent. She took a long draught of the bittersweet elixir. The taste brought back thoughts of the lands of their tribe to the south. The taste was comforting. Aglu brought a stool for her to sit. "I've already ridden a god from the Mother's black void, Aunt. What more could this world want of me today?" Aglu smiled grimly. She rose and walked to the center of the tent, to the stone that had roared with light that morning. Now the fat and moss were burning low in the cradle of the stone. Aglu strode to a wide woven basket of cliff moss. Grabbing a large bundle of it in her massive arm, she hurled it onto the smolder of the stone kullik. The smell of rotted plants burning reached Yuka as the flames began to grow anew. "You must endure the kankin on the same day that you do this, my little legend." Yuka felt a small seed of dread in her belly again. "Today? Even the women I've met who braved the dark at my age waited at least another season or more before a child. The Salt Sisters are gathering already to mark you themselves. You need to understand what you've done today." Aglu brought another stool over to sit next to Yuka. "What do you know of what happens to those who are able to rise after they brave the dark?" Yuka thought back to conversations before her mother died. "My mother said that gifts would be given, honors. The girl would be given the greater share of lurker bile and leathers, should she wish them. Sometimes a war chief or a salt sister would take the girl under her wing and teach her the craft of leadership in combat. If you rose from the black with the god at your heels, you were seen as blessed, a giver to your tribe, a leader." Aglu took the skin of henniper wine from Yuka and threw back a large gulp of the strong liquid. "Aye. And what do you think happens to the girl who rose from the black, riding one of the deep gods into the damned sky?" Yuka knew what she wanted to say, but shrugged regardless. Aglu was not fooled. She chuckled. My love, do not play the coy girl with me. The same wisdom that ran through my sister's veins runs in yours. Yuka was silent for a moment longer. The fire on the kullik grew brighter. The light was welcome, but the shadows of the wide tent grew blacker. I've done something here, haven't I? Aglu barked out a laugh. I said the spark to the flame. She leaned closer. Yuka could smell the sweet, heady scents of smoke, weed, and fire honey from the woman again. Your legend is born, child. Cliff moss crackled in the kullik flame as she spoke. Already the fishermen, hunters, and caravans that came to this shore to witness this season's dark plunge are going their different ways. Every mind will be pondering the miracle that they witnessed this morning. There's nothing that catches fire like a good tale. And I'll eat the bones of my ship if you can find me a better story than what I saw today. All I did was survive the black. Her words were flat, uncertain. Yuka, you conquered the black. Aglu stood, draining the last of her wine and drawing a furry sleeve of her cloak across her mouth with her arms. Think of the sky above. The white sky brings wind, ice, cold, and death. The dark water brings food, fat, warmth, and life. This is what the northern tribes believe above all else. You led a god of the dark into the pale white sky. You brought food to the barren, life to the death. Yuka sighed, smiling. Your words are fierce and strong, Aunt. That's fine for a fireside legend, but what of the girl? What does it mean for her? It means that she has 27 women outside my tent wishing to witness the giving of your kankin. Aglu and Yuka turned in unison towards the new voice to see the light rider standing before the tent flap, flanked by 2 fighting women that Yuka did not know, and the sisters that had witnessed the rites of her that morning. The old woman at the front held out a needle, a thin needle. One of her salt sisters stood behind her with a stone plate and a bundle of what looked like thread of some sort. Another held a bowl of thick black paste. The old woman sounded almost mischievous when she spoke again. Shall we proceed? Yuka was determined not to make a sound as the steel needle and dyed thread, made of the spun muscle sinew of a female jaka, was guided slowly through the flesh of her face and her thighs. The pain was difficult, but almost worse was the forest of wide, reverent eyes that looked at her from every angle. The only soothing presence was Aglu. She had been pushed to the edges of the tent while the sisters worked, and the other women of the surrounding shore villages bore witness. As soon as the rite of the kankin had begun, Aglu had brought out her flute made of the rarest duskwood from the southern forests. She made her presence known to Yuka through the crowd by playing a soft, mountainous tune from her wood flute. The musical sound amid the fog of whispers and mutterings of the other women made all the difference in the world to Yuka. 2 sisters worked on the markings of both of Yuka's legs. The light rider had charge of her face markings. In the copper shards and the other cliffs to the south, all your women's kankin is green, yes, made from beaver fat and crushed star leaf. Not wanting to move her face, Yuka gave a grunt of assent. Well, here in the dark north, we have soot from our kullik, and fat from the deep mothers. The old woman held up one of the threads of sinew dyed in the black mixture. Yours will be black. As the light rider brought the needle into the flesh of Yuka's cheek once more, one of the salt sisters dabbed a soft cloth against the tears that beaded at the edges of Yuka's eyes. As if reading her thoughts, the light rider said softly, Be not ashamed of the tears, girl. There's not a woman of our bone and steel alive that doesn't react to the pain of her kankin. We simply need to keep your salt water from disturbing the dye. Yuka gave another grunt of assent. As a new searing of the other side of her cheek began, she closed her eyes and tried to focus on the dulcet sways of Aglu's music. She had heard so little music since she and her father had made the journey north. The The song from the wooden instrument her aunt wielded brought Yuka back to the craggly mountains of the south, where the copper woven into her hair had been mined. Yuka dreamt of the taste of rock goat stew cooked by her father on a cold summer night, and the smell of henniper seed cakes cooling on the table. This dark northern shore of her mother's provenance was a wondrously mysterious place, but she missed the windy, forested cliffs of home. Yuka's memory of food was cast aside by the noisy arrival of huge platters of thick, oily bread, stone-smoked kelfish, and thick slabs of blubbery black meat that were brought in from the light riders' men, who had been slowly roasting them outside. The tent was already packed with women that were there to witness Yuka's markings, but the arrival of the food made it more so. The men laid the platters down in the center of the cliff near the kullik and left. This ceremony was for the warriors and other women of the village. The air was suddenly filled with the smell of fry bread and sharp, vinegary salt. At the arrival of the food, attention was swerved slightly from Yuka as she sat receiving her markings. More henniper wine was produced. The women around began to feast, and Aunt Aglu began another sprightly tune, a familiar one to Yuka. The large woman winked at her niece from across the tent. Tension faded like a morning sigh, and Yuka felt that she could bear the intense pain of her arm and the needle and the thread with fewer eyes on her. She began to wonder what she would look like with her marks. Her blood rushed at the thought of wearing her story for all to see in these markings. In her village, among the Halo tribe, Yuka had only ever been known as the odd, short girl with red hair and the famous greeneress mother. Siku of the Halo tribe was a name that was on nearly as many lips in the south as the Light Riders was in the north. Keep still a few heartbeats longer, girl. Then you may join the women in the feast. The pain in her legs lifted slightly as the women sewing the dye into her flesh rose from their work. Both smiled down at Yuka as they rose and bowed in turn to her and the Light Rider. The old wise woman herself laid one more cut into the side of Yuka's cheek, then stepped back. She went over to the nearby table and brought up a thick, foul-smelling paste. This is the last of it, girl. The paste had the heady scent of piss, but was black as the night. The Light Rider rubbed the mixture over Yuka's thighs, then brought a layer over the marks across her face. This will set the marks and keep the cuts from getting inflamed. Rise now, girl. You are now an undoubted woman of the tribes. She stepped back, and the revelry in the tent subsided slightly as the women all around turned to see Yuka stand up from her stool. The Light Rider spoke loudly. Rise, Yuka, who this morning rode a living god into the dead sky. All eyes turned to Yuka once more. Exhausted, with every inch of her body either sore or stinging, she stepped forward for all of them to see once more. Her red hair hung damp and limp around her shoulders, and the copper rings clinked as she moved. She was sticky with salt and sweat and had trickles of blood running down her legs. Yuka knew that she must look truly pitiful to the women around her. The roar the women gave her seemed to shake the tent around them more than any wind. So many of them rushed forward, slabs of food and skins of drink in their hand. The next few minutes were a blur to her, as every woman in the tent laid their hands on her. Names were given to her that were instantly forgotten. Questions were asked of her next venture that she did not know how to answer. Not for the first time, Yuka wondered why her mother wanted all of this for her. The sky take all of you. Give her some room now. Her aunt, the great protector, shoved through the crowd and brought Yuka back to her stool once again. She gave her a slab of food that had a generous helping of the lurker meat and fry bread upon it. You'll not stand up from that stool until you've eaten and drunk, or by that deep mother I'll end your legend right here. The large woman barked at the rest of the tent to give the girl some space, then took up her flute once more and began playing. Yuka did not realize how hungry she was until the first bite of oily fry bread. When the hunger took hold, it was like a storm. She ate as ravenously as she could without dripping grease into her kankin wounds. She only stopped eating to take a long swig of the hennifer wine. Whoever had brewed this drink had made it thick and strong. Her head was swimming after several draws on the skin. When her slate was clear and the juices from the meat had been mopped up by the last of the fry bread, Yuka sat back and sighed. The wine had numbed her pain slightly, and her belly had been truly full for the first time that day. It was then that she noticed one of the women standing near the enormous kullik, staring at her. She was very tall, with a willowy frame. Her clothes were made entirely of lurker skin, tanned and dyed stone gray. She had a strange cloak about her shoulders. It was deep blue, like the sea when the rare sun was shining. It was not made of any cloth that Yuka had ever seen. Her features had the coloring of one of the girls who had swam the black with Yuka that morning. The girl had been taken by the deep mother. The fierce-looking woman's left cheek held a terrible scar that looked like a great red canyon caving into that side of her face. The look she gave Yuka was leveled and entirely bereft of joy and merriment the rest of the feast. Moments after their eyes met, the woman approached Yuka. The younger girl noticed the woman had the ceremonial warrior stain etched in red and black on the tops of her hands. Aglu had similar markings on her hands as well. Both were part of both women's kankin. Yuka sat up straighter, or what felt like straighter with the amount of hennifer wine she had drunk. When she neared, Aglu noticed the woman approach and stepped in her way. The tall, gaunt woman held out an open hand in reply, not taking her eyes off Yuka. "Please." Her voice was like the wind hissing through old rock. Yuka did not know what to do. After a long, awkward moment, she raised her hand and beckoned the woman closer. As the woman got within an arm's length distance, Yuka could see tears behind the woman's eyes. The scarred woman knelt suddenly and bowed her head to Yuka. "My people wander the red claw of the eastern crags. I am war chief of my tribe." Yuka heard an unfamiliar slithering sound of something smooth on leather. The woman produced a large knife with a bone tip. Aglu reached for her own furs angrily for her own knife, but the gaunt woman held up a hand again. "I mean her no harm. I promise. It is a gift." Yuka stared at the beautiful craftsmanship of the weapon in the woman's hand. The bone it was made from was dense and dark, and there was a strange marking carved all over it. "Behind this blade are 16 spears of women ready to serve unto death at my word. The nomads of the crags fight harder than any harridan of the grasp. If you make the journey south with us, you will find us loyal allies." Yuka was so nonplussed, she felt momentarily outside of her mind, as if she saw all that was before her from above. Loyal allies, she thought. Starting to panic, having no idea how to react, Yuka glanced at Aglu. The large warrior was squinting hard at the woman of the eastern crags. Yuka looked around the room and saw that the light rider was gazing over the soft flames of the kullik at them. The girl brushed a strand of damp hair out of her eyes and straightened her posture in the stool. "I must be bold, seen as bold. I am a woman, a warrior." "A journey, you say? Allies for what?" She made her voice sound as authoritative as she could. The dark-haired woman's features relaxed slightly. She rose to one knee. "To bring death to the Camden." "What?" Aglu stepped forward. Yuka blanched. "The sky folk," she thought to herself. "Stay away, nomad." Aglu's hand fell to one of her own knives tucked into her belt. The woman from the crags rose to her feet and brought her own hand behind her back. Both women slid instinctively into a fighting stance. "Enough!" The light rider's voice shot out over the fire. "Any owner of blood that hits the floor of this tent will be strapped to the ice until the sun rises again." Yuka stood up from her stool. She held no weapon, but she knew she would claw the eyes out of this woman if she hurt Aglu. "Nanak, step back now." The aged voice of the light rider was fierce as she pushed her way through the other women to where Yuka and Aglu stood facing the nomad. The ancient woman was dwarfed by the other two fighting women, but she pushed both of them back a step. She turned to the nomad and spoke in an angry whisper. "The dark take you, Nanak. I said we would speak on this matter later." She turned to face the rest of the crowd. "Feast for the kankin is over. The rest of you grab a last bite of food and leave us for the night. For those who climb home tomorrow, the deep mother blesses you. For those of you that sail with me, we rise at dawn." Yuka felt the chill of the night air swim in over the fleeting warmth of the feast. After a moment, Yuka was alone in the room with two fierce warriors and the paragon of the shores. Ataxak, please explain. Aglu had relaxed her knife hand, but was still looking hard at the nomad woman, Nanak. For a moment, she wondered who Ataxak was. Then Yuka realized that her Aunt Aglu had addressed the Light Rider with her true name. The old woman, the Light Rider, now Ataxak, sighed, then reached for the nearest skin of Henniper wine. When she spoke to Yuka. What do you know of Camden, girl? The old woman moved to the center of the tent to stare into the simmering moss of the burning kullik. Yuka watched her take a long pull from the skin before she answered. They buy copper and tin from our tribe, and others. The caravans come through twice a summer. I hear they do trade in the east as well. The old woman nodded. Yes, and farther north with every passing year. Have you ever seen one of their air beasts? Yuka shook her head. All in the Halo tribe knew that the caravans bearing the colors of Camden came from great vessels from their land far and away in the southern worlds. It was said their great vessels traveled through the air. Yuka thought much of this was probably just the embellishment of charismatic merchants. The old woman, Ataxak, turned her back on the smoldering fire and handed the skin of wine to Yuka. I have. They float, great and massive, coming out of the sky like dead lurkers. They are bloated, smoking, clanking things that could only have come from deep in the dead sky. Yuka shivered in spite of herself. The dull aches in her right arm, face, and legs were coming back with a vengeance. Trade is what they seek, they say. The old woman coughed and turned back towards the fire. Aglu produced her clay pipe and was filling its small bowl with amber smoke towards the fire. She watched the woman closely as she filled her pipe with the weed. Nanak remained stoically silent. All whispers I have heard of Camden are lathered with poisonous lies from greedy merchants and lecherous tradesmen. Trade might as well be the name of their strongest god. Ataxak beckoned Yuka to come and stand with her by the fire. She nodded at the kullik. What do you see, girl? A kullik. A source of fire and warmth, Yes, the old woman interrupted. And what does it take to feed this fire? The harvesting of mountain cotton and cliff moss. A lurker's fat must be warmed and used to... All of this simply so that we in the far north may cook and keep the nights cold at bay. The old woman finished for her. These fires that warm and feed Camden require much more to burn, and they are always hungry. Yuka thought to her father, who did trade with the Camden merchants, as all did. The copper mined by the Halo tribe was the best in the cliffs. The merchants were always friendly. They brought amber smokeweed and dried fruits from the southern lands. They toasted the village with strong, sweet liqueurs, said to come from half a world away. Their arrival was always greatly anticipated by her village. What do you fear of them? Yuka asked after a moment. Nanak scoffed quietly to herself. Aglu gave the nomad another hard look as she lit her pipe. I fear what they want from us and what they will do to get it. Have they attacked? No blood has been spilt yet, child. Not ours yet, anyway. The old woman looked back once more at Yuka. I suppose that I can't call you that after today, child. You are a woman now. More than that, you are a woman who has swum the black and danced with the deep mother. More than that, you are a woman who has brought a god through the dead sky and to her people by herself. She smiled. Where is this going, Ataxak? Aglu asked softly through the growing cloud of southern weed smoke that smelled of tree bark on a cold winter's night. The old woman slowly clasped her hands together. She looked almost nervous, standing before Yuka. Tomorrow I and many like-minded women sail out to the lowest reaches of the grasp. There we will join a Jaka fur and horn caravan south to the last mountain. Yuka heard her aunt give a quick intake of breath. You make for Tungayok, Aglu said quietly. Yuka looked over to her. The Green City, she thought. When a woman of the Oakhead wished to follow the Deep Mother, they would go north to swim the Black. If they wished to sing with the Green Spirit, they would go south to Tungayok. Aglu's voice was barely above a smoky whisper. Are you trying to start a war? Her aunt's words were haunting to Yuka. In all the risings of the moon and sun, she had never heard her warrior aunt speak in fear. Ataksuk gave Aglu a reproving look for half a moment, then relented and sighed. I am trying to stop a massacre. Could that call for war? Perhaps. Massacre, Aglu took a step forward. Who has died? What scores have been killed? Has a war-stained spear chief such as myself somehow not heard of some great recent fight? The old woman batted away Aglu's words with a lazy wave of her hand. Aglu, you are fierce in the field, but lost when around an evening fire. Do you not see that we are being surrounded? Aglu scoffed. By commerce? By trade, damn you. Yuka could see the icy flame that she had seen that morning in the Light Rider's eyes as she spoke to Aglu. She held out her hand and made a gesture to Aglu's pipe. The warrior woman handed the smoking clay to the Light Rider without question. The old woman took a long drag from the pipe, closing her eyes and reveling in the flavorful, stimulating herb. She exhaled a long cloud of sweet-smelling smoke. I love the weed of the South as much as you, but do you think that the merchants that bring it to us are content to trade in dried fruits for Jaka furs and starleaf? We hear of such might that Camden wields from the world south of us. Yet all we have seen as of yet are friendly merchants and flirtatious tradesmen. Do you trust them, Aglu? Do you? Yuka blanched as she realized the old woman's eyes had turned back to her. She licked her lips nervously, not wanting to sound foolish she had again that night. An old prayerful song of her mother suddenly came to her mind. She said the words aloud. You must keep to your roots, and fear not the storms around. Grow yourself deep, and you are stronger than all around you. The words had been her mother's long ago. The old woman chuckled darkly. A green proverb, and a foolish one at that. Yuka heard the old woman sigh once more, saying something to herself. She could not be sure, but it seems as though the Light Rider had uttered a single word to herself. Siku. What I want from you, child, what we, the old woman nodded at Nanak, ask of you is that you come to us as emissary, and come with us to witness the gathering of women from both faiths. Aglu spoke again. The wise hearts gather? The old woman nodded. Salt sisters and green bloods alike are converging on the last mountain as we speak. We will gather, we will eat, we will smoke, drink, and decide what is to be done about the circling sky folk. The Light Rider looked over at Nanak. This spear chief of the east is one of my emissaries. Her daughter was meant to join us, but... Yuka saw Nanak lower her eyes. The old woman looked to Yuka like the sort who would spill blood before tears. You rose this day, child, not her. The old woman continued. Nanak hoped her child would emerge today a leader. Instead, you emerged as a legend. Nanak and I see potential in you, and we hope for our youth, something we have hoped for our youth for a very long time. She nodded at Yuka once more. Will you join me, Yuka of the flame hair, rider of gods? Her eyes had a small twinkle of mirth in them then. Yuka would not look at Aglu. She would not look at Nanak. She stared back at the woman who commanded so many, who spoke to her now as if she were an equal. She calmed herself, taking a deep breath. I will. But I will ask you to answer when I ask, why do you want me? The wicked mischief that glimmered in the Light Rider's eyes when she spoke, gave Yuka more chills than anything else that had been said that night. "I need a spark to bring the flames," she whispered through the smoke. Thus ends the second file. The next file brings us south, and we see what Yuka sees next.